Hello Summoners, and welcome back to another one of our videos. My name is Nathan Ng, and today we'll be breaking down the meta moving into patch 11.3. While we do expect changes soon, a lot of these concepts should remain relevant even in the next patch. If you want to win more games, you need to know what objectives and power spikes that you'll need to play around. Patch 11.3 is coming soon, and we'll touch on some of our meta predictions at the end of the video. To make things easier, I'm going to talk about each individual lane and what kind of playstyles are finding the most success right now. Remember, you can climb with any champion in the game as long as you at least try to follow your role in the game. We won't spend too much time on specific champions and builds this time around. If you're looking for some of those, check out one of our tier list videos or our OP builds videos. Before we get started with the breakdown, our question of the day is, what's one thing that you hate about the current meta? For me, I really don't like playing against support champions mid. Let us know what you're thinking in the comments down below. Okay, so before we get into the different lanes, let's talk about the early, mid, and late game meta. The early game is crucial right now, and it's even more important in solo queue. This is when most lanes are won or lost, and it's really hard to recover from a bad early game. People will always want to FF at 15, but right now it is really difficult to come back into the game with how easy it is to snowball a lead. I'm not telling you to surrender, I'm just telling you guys that you need to prepare for the bumpy ride. When I say bumpy ride, I'm talking about the mid game. This is where everything starts to go off the rails. Once a powerful lane has gotten their first turret, you'll need to play around that lane for the rest of the mid game. The goal here is to stabilize the game, and then you'll have options. Try to look for opportunities away from the fed Kai'Sa, or maybe just try to dogpile her while she's farming on her own. Whatever the play is, remember that the mid game is very difficult to play perfectly. There's always a chance to jump back into the game, so don't give up if you're behind. When you're in lead, just make sure that you don't push your luck too far, otherwise you'll end up with a loss. We expect to see this explosive style of gameplay continue in patch 11.3 with some new champions thrown into the mix. With how intense the early and mid game are, we hardly see any matches reach the late game anymore. When they do, the meta is pretty much the same as it usually is. Once everybody's on a relatively even playing field, it comes down to the better macro decisions and mechanical outplays. We won't spend too much time talking about the late game since it's pretty standard. Remember to peel your ADCs, since the role is insanely powerful with multiple completed items. Shield Bow is receiving a buff next patch. As it gains popularity, peeling for your ADC will be even easier than before and even more important. Okay, so let's go ahead and start talking about the individual lanes, starting with the top lane. Ever since the beginning of the preseason, there's a lot of changes in this lane. What kinds of champions are good? Are tanks still OP? Can Aatrox 1v3 only with the Gore Drinker? That last one is yes. Right now, top laners have a lot of variety in their champion choices. Every position in the game can fill multiple roles, and this is a big reason as to how explosive some solo queue games are. Tank tops, not to get confused with tank tops, can fill the initiator role, while the split pushers like Camille can totally take over the game with just their mechanics. In the early game, top is the most volatile role in the meta right now. When you are messing up a trade, a good opponent will heavily punish you for the rest of the laning phase. This isn't anything new to top lane, and experienced players know that you can't just farm or trade whenever you feel like it. This is why I feel like a top lane is full of masochists, and you have to be a special kind of crazy to play it. If you're playing a tank, make sure that you're planning out your trades beforehand. It's crucial that you don't die against somebody like Darius, otherwise you'll make things a lot harder for you and your teammates. On the other hand, Garen and Darius are pretty strong because they can farm, trade, and sustain reliably into most matchups. If you want to play a more stable early game, top laners with easy trade patterns and reliable sustain are doing great right now. The consistency to not go 0-5 in lane will help you win a lot more games, in any role, but more so in top lane. In the mid game, this is where your role and champion play a huge part in what kind of game you're playing. If you're the initiator and tank for your team, you have to leave your lane and start fights around objectives. You can walk around bot and you can TP in, it doesn't matter. Just make sure that you're trying to make those plays. As bruisers or split pusher, your role is a bit more flexible. You can spend some time in the side lane split pushing, but it might be worth it to spread your lead across the map. No matter what you do, try your best to communicate with your team what kind of plays you're looking for. In the late game, play out your champion and roll to the best of your ability. If you're split pushing, keep split pushing. If you're a tank, look for those fights and TP flanks. Remember not to always let any lane push into your team for too long. If you have TP, it's your job to manage the side lanes, even if you're a tank against a split pusher. We expect the top lane to stay the same in patch 11.3 with some powerful Gore Drinker users out of the picture. Keep an eye out for Riven, since we're expecting her to be one of the best top laners in the meta. Moving on to the jungle, a lot of players are saying that this might be the strongest role in this meta. This meta is all about flexibility, and there's a viable pick for everyone. You can play tanks, assassins, and mage in the jungle with a high amount of success. Ivern is strong too, which means that junglers can play literally anything in the jungle and find some way to win. In the early game, this is where you'll need to play the best in order to find your success. you'll need to understand what kind of champion you're playing. What are you good at? What champions are you weak against? Can you win the 2v2 with your mid laner? These are all questions that you need to consider in the early game. If you want to learn more about jungle matchups, clear paths, effective ganks, and more, you should visit us at ProGuides.com. We have coaches online 24/7, and they're reading to answer any question that you might have. This season is about understanding the game, and a high elo coach might be the right move to get you to help you reach your goal. Coming back to the jungle meta, Scuttle Crab is a crucial part of the early game. You have to identify early what your plan is to secure at least one of these crabs. The best way to do this is to predict what crab your enemy will go for, and then go for the other one. This is what you'll usually do as a weaker early game jungler, like a tank. If you're playing one of the broken dueling champions like Udyr, try to contest both Scuttle Crabs. Champions that love to fight 1v1 are powerful right now, but you still need to pay attention to the rest of the team. For example, if you want to contest the top Scuttle Crab, you need to check on the lane state of your top and mid laner. If you get collapsed on, it's your fault. Losing in the jungle early on is really bad for your team, and it's very difficult to get back into the game without the enemy jungler making a lot of mistakes. Once the early game is finished, jungling is a lot more about keeping balance between farming your camps and looking for fights. It mostly depends on what type of team that you're playing with. If you're doing really well with Skarner, focus on getting picks and sieging turrets with your numbers. You should avoid power farming your jungle in the mid game unless you're behind or close to an important power spike. Next lane that we're going to be talking about is mid. It shouldn't be a surprise to you that there's a couple of viable roles in the lane, including mages, assassins, and even enchanters. Champions that are abusing Moonstone and Staff of Flowing Water, like Seraphine, are some of the strongest picks right now due to their insane power spike in the mid game. To get to the mid game, you need to play a strong early game. A solid early game looks a lot different for every mid laner, and it's something that you might want to communicate with your jungler beforehand. For example, if you're playing somebody like Anivia mid, who needs some levels before she's strong, your jungler should know that you can't really help them at Scuttle Crab. This should save you a headache early on when your jungle Udyr wants to contest both Scuttle Crabs on his own. As a mage or enchanter mid, you want to farm really well early and avoid silly deaths. If you're playing somebody like Pantheon, you need to take advantage of your strengths as soon as possible. If you can kill the enemy mid laner, great. If they're playing super safe, early roams to the bot or top lane can help you get that snowball rolling, and you'll definitely take over that game. After the early game, the mid game will require you to use your strengths to win the game. Mid game might be the most influential role in the mid lane right now, which is quite appropriate, and it's not because of the matching names. Moonstaff, champions, and other mages are so powerful in skirmishes, and they only need 1 or 2 cheap items to reach their full potential. Even though Staff of Flowing Water is getting nerfed, we think that the meta will stay the same in patch 11.3, with some champions like Karma running Moonstaff combo in the mid lane. As an assassin, you should hopefully get some early kills, which will help you shut down the enemy until you start to fall off. Okay, so let's talk about our final lane, the bot lane. Starting off with ADCs, the role was doing pretty bad during the preseason. After some huge buffs to champions and items, ADCs are in a really good spot right now. In patch 11.2, marksmen with flexible damage and utility are the strongest in the game. This means that Kai'Sa and Jhin are excellent choices if you want to keep dealing damage and have those high impact in teamfights. With very few changes coming up, we expect this to be the same next patch. In the early game, the bot lane is mostly decided by the support plays. Your goal is to farm and trade as efficiently as possible, which means that you need to rely on your support to help you out a bit. Even though Kai'Sa and Vayne are considered late game champions, they are both really strong 2v2 fighters right now. All of this sounds great for an ADC main, but remember that you're playing the bot lane, the home of multi-man ganks and tower dives, where you can't have fun. It's crucial that you don't overstep in the early game, otherwise you'll fall extremely far behind. In the mid game and late game, this is where you start to shine. ADCs do a lot of damage once they got their 2-item power spikes. Some champions only need their mythic to start pumping out damage, and no matter who you're playing, make sure that you're always with your team in every single fight. Even if you have to miss out on a little bit of farm, you can't ignore a big 3v3 or 4v4 over Dragon. The last role that we'll be talking about is support. There are 2 support playstyles that are successful in this meta, the Enchanter role and the Engage role. You can get away playing with both as long as your team can play around you too. In the early game, your champion choice will determine how you play the game. If you're playing somebody like Lulu or Janet, poke down the enemy and make it difficult to harass. If you're playing an Engage or peel support like Thresh or Alistar, avoid taking poke until you know you can start a fight. A lot of high elo players are picking Engage support so they can roam around during the early game, flipping the map upside down. If you get a good roam mid or top lane, you'll totally win that lane for them, allowing them to snowball the game on their own. It only takes one good roam to make a massive advantage, but remember that you can't leave your ADC on their own for too long. In the mid game, focus on getting vision around the important objectives while keeping your ADC safe. Help them farm waves if you need to, and make sure you don't give the enemy team an easy dive into the Jhin solo farming mid. Once the map starts to break open, roaming support should play with their jungles to make plays, as long as their ADC isn't in danger of dying. you're basically a glorified babysitter. Moving into patch 11.3, the support meta is going to stay pretty much the same. It's a great time to play both roaming and enchanter supports. And that'll be wrapping up our meta breakdown headed into patch 11.3. Remember that you can win games with any champion, just try to follow the meta playstyle. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to our channel so you can go ahead and stay up to date with our tier list, OB picks, and news. Don't forget to answer our question of the day. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.